Next, we will take a look at the extruder assembly. Now, this is definitely one of the more complex sub-assemblies, so don't worry, we will walk you step by step through the entire process.
All of the screws and hardware you see on the left side of the screen are included in your extruder kit, but the 2 screws on the right side of the screen are not included in the kit. There is one M3 by 5mm screw, which you can find one of in your extra parts bag. There is also one M3 by 12 screw, which for the first 40 or so units was not included in the kit, but we will make sure to include one going forward. First thing we're going to do is get rid of those pneumatic couplers or Bowden tube couplers. We won't need those. Then we will take the faceplate for the extruder and use our M3 by 5 screw to securely attach it to the motor. Next, we can attach our extruder gear by adjusting the tiny grub screw on it, making sure that it is aligned with the vertical face of the motor shaft. Now, turning our attention to the lever arm, the first thing we can do is attach the bearing using the shortest black-colored M4 screw. Next, we will take 2 of the M4 screws that are included in the extruder kit itself. We'll take the shorter one and screw it into the bottom of the extruder assembly. Then we can put our spring in place and attach the longer of the 2 screws to the extruder lever arm. It can be a little tricky because of the spring tension going on, but we will put the lever arm collar and then the M3 by 12 screw in place and secure it. And there you have it. These are the parts that you should have left over from your extruder assembly.
With that out of the way, we will move on to more of the hardware. First thing we want to do is find the large hot end collar, and we will use a handful of M3 screws to attach that to the sheet metal base. We will be using 3 M3 screws that are 5mm long and 1 that is 20mm long. The 20mm long screw will be used as a post for wire strain relief later on. So that's the screw that I'm putting in first, followed by the 3 smaller screws in the other designated holes. They should thread right into the sheet metal base. Next we have 8 40mm long M5 screws, and those are going to go into each of the 8 holes on the sheet metal base. Now we will find our bag of spacers, and we are going to be putting some of these 15mm long spacers onto every single one of the posts. 2 spacers will go on each of the 4 outside posts, and we can top those off with lock nuts. Next we will use 4 more 15mm long spacers and put those on the 4 internal bolts, and then put V-slot wheels on top of those. We'll follow those up with 5mm spacers and then more lock nuts. Now we can grab our hex key and socket and tighten everything up. And here is what the subassembly should look like at this point in the process. Next we'll grab our motor with the extruder mechanism attached to it and use 2 M3 screws to attach it to the sheet metal base. Moving right along, we will grab our hot end, which we modified in a previous section, and we will use the small hot end collar to attach it to the rest of the subassembly. We need to cut a small section of the Bowden tube to reach up to the extruder. So here I'm lining everything up just to get an idea of how long it should be, and then cutting it as flush as possible and inserting it into the hot end. Here I grabbed a knife just to try to squish that Bowden tube into position in the hot end as much as possible. Here I remove the cooling fan just to make things a little bit easier to see. We'll grab our small hot end collar and 2 M3 screws and attach it in place. Make sure to take note of the angle that the hot end is positioned in. We're going to want the shortest end of the hot end facing up so that it doesn't hit the conveyor belt when printing. With that, the extruder subassembly is complete. We can move on to the next step.